Good afternoon, everyone. The meeting for Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure will now come to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Brown May.
Here.
Assemblyman Ellison.
Present.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Here.
Assemblyman Watts.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Assemblyman Yeager.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts. Chairman Ro
Here.
Moreno.
And I am here. And we have a quorum for today's meeting. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's meeting for the Assembly Growth and Infrastructure. Today we will have several presentations from agencies involved in Nevada's transportation sector. Before we begin with our agenda items, I would like to briefly review how our virtual meetings will work. The legislative building remains closed to the public, and so all committee meetings will be virtually. Committee members, staff, and everyone else will participate either through Zoom or by telephone. For committee members, if you could please remember to silence your phones, turn off all your electronics during the meeting, and mute your microphones when you are not speaking to minimize any background noise. Please leave your cameras on so that we can maintain a quorum throughout our meeting today. And please state your name for the record every time you unmute your mic to speak. It helps us keep accurate records and meeting minutes. For members of the public who wish to testify or present public comment, we will have the option to call in or submit written testimony or comments. This can be done online at the page for today's meeting on Nellis, which is located on the legislative website. In the same place, you will find today's agenda. Members of the public have the option to submit an opinion on bills online and to sign up to participate during the public comment period at the end of today's meeting. All the materials submitted for a meeting will be posted on the committee's page on the legislative website. The meeting can be viewed through our streaming services or the legislature's YouTube channel, both of which can be accessed on the legislative website. If you have missed a meeting and would like to know what happened, all the committee meetings are recorded and posted on the legislature's website, usually the next day. Anyone who would like to receive electronic notifications of committee's agendas and minutes can do so by signing up on the Nevada Legislature's website or by contacting the committee manager. She is available by email at asmgi@asm.state.nv.us. As always, if you need help or have questions, please don't hesitate to contact our committee staff. We are always available by email. That address also appears on our committee page on Nellis. And with that, we're on to today's agenda. So our first order of business today is kind of an exciting order of business. We'd like to welcome our newest member to our committee. Assemblywoman Tracy Brown May was sworn in just yesterday to represent Nevada's 42nd Assembly District. We will be joining us on the Assembly, not only joining the Assembly, she's joining us on this Committee of Growth and Infrastructure. Assemblywoman Brown May, as I said, is at our first meeting last week. We are a committee that is fun. We have some really exciting projects and initiatives to review this session as we work towards sustainable growth in Nevada. So on behalf of the other members, I'd like to welcome you to the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, and we look forward to working with you this session. At this time, I would like to invite you to unmute your mic and just say a few words if you like. You don't have to, just to introduce yourself to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate that. Tracy Brown May for the record. As you said, my district is 42. It is a very fun district, so I'm really excited. It's in the heart of Las Vegas, just west of this strip. I'm very pleased to be serving on this committee in particular. The infrastructure we rely on ensures our health and safety of all of our residents, and it allows them to get their necessary supports and services. My background has included interacting with many state divisions that fall under the scope of this committee, and I am pleased to see some of our distinguished colleagues that are on the agenda today. In a professional capacity, I served in the Nevada Transportation Planning and Advisory Committee, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and I've worked closely with leadership from the Southern Nevada Regional Transportation Commission on specialized transportation. This committee is close to my heart. Highways, roads, license plates, traffic laws, they're all areas that I've had an opportunity to work on. I do look forward to learning lots more about the areas that I'm not familiar with, but I am excited to be here on this very fun committee.
Well, thank you. And we are very excited to be working with you. So welcome. And now we will welcome our presenters who are all involved in Nevada's transportation sector. Members of 4 different organizations have joined us today to give presentations explaining their agency's role in Nevada's transportation landscape and to answer questions from committee members. Our first presentation, we will welcome Ms. Julie Butler, who is the Director of Nevada's Department of Motor Vehicles. Ms. Butler, if you'd like to begin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Julie Butler, Director of the Department of Motor Vehicles. It's a pleasure to be here today to present before you and give you an overview of the DMV and some of the legislation that you might be seeing move through your committee as the session
Ms. Butler, we're having a little difficulty. Can you hear me?
I can.
We're having difficulty with your sound. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that happened yesterday. I'll just kind of try to take it slow and hope for the best.
Okay.
All right. So is this moving? Yeah.
Worse yet, it says you're Sean Seaver on the screen.
Well, it does. Yeah, my stage name, as my staff is calling. So anyway, I don't know if this is working, but because it doesn't seem to work. Okay, here we go. The department, the next slide goes over the department's vision and mission, and that can be summed up in 7 words, which are identity, information, consumer protection, and public safety. The department is comprised of 7 divisions supported by the director's office. We have 1,267 authorized positions. The Field Services Division is our largest division and probably the one with which you're most familiar, as that is our customer facing division and the staff that provide the operational support in our field offices statewide. Central Services is our 2nd largest division and supports the department's back office operations. We have a regulatory
Excuse me, Ms. Butler, this is Judy in BPS. When broadcast, what we're seeing with your presentation is we're seeing the current slide and the next slide. So we're seeing the presenter view. I don't think that's what you intended. Up at the top of your PowerPoint, there's a little bar and it says display settings. Click on that. Yes, I click on that and then swap views. Click on that, please. Yep, that one right there, click.
Yeah, it's not enabling.
It's not enabling. All right, I'm going to stop your screen share and we'll try that again.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so if you would, if your PowerPoint is open and then you would do your screen share. And then select your PowerPoint.
There we go.
Let's take a look at that.
That's what you need to be seeing.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for walking me through that. I appreciate that. Okay, so anyway, back to our overview. We do have a regulatory arm in our compliance enforcement division. Motor carrier collects and distributes fuel taxes on behalf of the entire state and registers commercial vehicles for intra and inter-state use. And finally, we have several supporting divisions, including our administrative services division, the research and project management division, which is noted as the Office of Project Management on your slide. And we have the Motor Vehicle Information Technology division, or MOVEit. No. It's not advancing. I might just give up on this altogether and just punt. Yeah, the slides are not advancing. Anyway, I do have members of my leadership team here today to answer any detailed questions that you might have. We do have 18 full-service offices and 8 rural offices, rural county assessor offices, 5 AAA offices, and 34 kiosk locations to service the residents of Nevada.
Ms. Butler, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but I just wanted to let you know that your screen froze and we missed probably the last 2 minutes or of what you said. Right after you stopped sharing, you kind of froze.
Yeah, so, and I think I'm having difficulty with it, so I'm just going to give some verbal comments, and I think you guys have the slides anyway, so maybe we can try and punt that way. I am on slide 5, which describes our locations. And as you can see, we have 18 offices statewide and a variety of alternative service providers located throughout the state. On slide 6, it discusses the department's how the department is funded, which is mainly highway fund and fee, with also some lesser revenue streams of transfers from internal budget accounts, cost allocations, reimbursements, and commissions. We also receive a very small general fund appropriation to support automatic voter registration. And finally, our department is statutorily capped in the amount of highway funds that it can receive. And that cap must stay under 22% of the funds collected and distributed to the highway fund, excluding fuel taxes. That 22% cap was increased to 27% in recent fiscal years to accommodate our IT modernization efforts. So now let's talk about where the money goes. So slide 7 shows a pie chart that displays where that goes. Okay. I'm on slide 7, and it describes where the money goes. And most of that, about 39% of the $1.5 billion that was collected in FY20, goes to counties and local school districts. Another 36% is distributed to the highway fund for the maintenance, administration, construction, and improvement of Nevada's highways. And the remainder is distributed, as you can see in the pie chart. So moving on to slide 8, I'd like to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic and the impact that it has had on the department's revenue collection. So the pandemic and the resulting office closures have impacted our collections for FY20. And so to mitigate, our staff devised a protocol to identify funds collected in fiscal year 21 and applied them to FY20 to bolster FY20's revenue collections. After these adjustments were made, moving on to slide 9, we see an overall decline in revenue of 3.92% in FY21 compared to the same time period in FY20. Highway fund revenues show a decline of 15.8%. However, most of that decline relates to a shifting of the basic governmental services tax on car registrations toward the general fund during the 31st special session. We'll continue to monitor revenues and projections and refine them as we move throughout the remainder of the budget process. So now, moving on to slide 10, I would like to discuss the impacts that the pandemic has had on the department's service levels. We continue to be affected by issues mostly related to the ongoing pandemic. The buildings are limited to 50% capacity to slow the spread of the virus. The effects of this are illustrated on slide 10, where you see the number of customers served for the last 2 quarters of 2020 is roughly half of what it was in the same period in 2019. On average, our Las Vegas metro area offices are seeing 700 customers per location per day, but we're also seeing a nearly 50% rate of no-shows for appointments. This is a contributing factor as to why our appointments continue to be booked out 90 days and complicates things for folks that need to come to an office to conduct their daily business. The department is doing its best to service the needs of the public while trying to help employees who must cope with distance learning for their children, COVID and other family and health issues, vacancies, and normal annual and sick leave that add to the challenges. So now let's talk about how we dig ourselves out of this hole. The way that we are going to do that is through technology and a process that we are calling transformation on slide 11. What COVID-19 has shown us over the past year is that the department radically needs to change its service delivery. We can no longer afford to be a brick and mortar in-person service delivery model. And that has really come to the forefront over the last year. We need to be an online operation where customers only come into the office as an exception rather than the rule. What we envision is that getting services from the department is just like any other online shopping experience, where you add the services you need to your cart, pay, and then you go about your day. Our department's major budget initiative is focused on this transformation effort to move most, if not all, of our services online over the next 4 fiscal years. Our concept is patterned after the state of California DMV's virtual field office and plans to use the same vendors who developed a proven solution for the California DMV. In addition to moving our services online, we are also actively looking to partner with industry where it makes sense to do so, to offload services where it makes sense. 2 examples of that are with drive schools and with salvage titles. Throughout the pandemic, the demand for drive exams has exceeded the supply of available drive examiners and appointments. So we asked ourselves, why not certify drive schools to give the same test, same examination that our DMV examiners can do? That way, Nevadans can either go to one of these private drive schools or they can come to the DMV to do their drive exam. So we reached out to industry and asked if they would be interested in partnering with us on such an endeavor, and they are. And so our staff has worked very diligently over the past several months to change some regulations to allow for these private drive schools to be certified by the department to administer drive exams. And we're in the very final stages of getting those regulations adopted. I'll touch on salvage titles a little more in a bit. Moving on to slide 12, for those of you on the money committees and just for general awareness for the other committee members, we have 2 budget bills, 2 policy bills, and 1 housekeeping bill this session. So we anticipate we're going to be very busy. Our first budget bill will change the name of our existing Management Services and Programs Division to the Research and Project Management Division. It will combine the team from our modernization effort, the STAR team, with the Management Services and Programs Division to create a dynamic and focused team on research and project management for our multiple business and IT projects. The bill also includes a request to extend our $1 technology fee on all DMV transactions, which is going to be crucial to funding our transformation effort over the next 4 years. Having this fee allows the department to offset its highway fund requests in order to maintain and upgrade its technology platforms. The bill maintains the current highway fund cap of 27%, which is crucial to our efforts. Our other budget bill deals with the off-highway vehicle trust account. In the 2009 legislative session, the legislature granted the department $500,000 in startup funds to initiate the off-highway vehicle account. And that implementation is completed. And so this bill would dissolve that budget account and transfer the remaining funds to the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources account for off-highway vehicle use. Moving on to slide 13 and our policy bills, two of which went before the Senate G&I committee yesterday, and the third is going tomorrow, I believe. SB 17 concerns drive schools. So part of the department's statutory mission is to license driver training schools that have a physical location in Nevada. But we now know that online schools exist, which means you don't have to have a brick and mortar location. And so what SB 17 would do is recognize that we can also license online driver training schools, and also make sure that these businesses know that in addition to providing their records physically, they can also provide them electronically to our department's licensing personnel. And Senate Bill 29 deals with salvage titles. As I mentioned previously, the pandemic has shown us that we need to re-examine the way we deliver our services, and we need to look at what we're providing in-house and what might make sense to offload in partnering with industry. And the salvage titles bill is just one such example. In this case, salvage vehicle industry representatives have offered to partner with the department in the review and processing of salvage titles. The department has the authority to engage with agents in other chapters of statutes, but not in the chapter dealing with junk and salvage vehicles. Industry representatives currently partner with DMVs in other states for the handling and processing of salvage titles. So Senate Bill 29 would just give the department the authority to work with these types of companies for the processing of these titles in Nevada. And then our final bill, which you'll be seeing at some point, is a housekeeping measure, Senate Bill 60, and that deals with license plates. Special plates approved in prior legislative sessions did not have consistent guidelines for plate design, development, specifications, and status changes. The proposed language in this bill will provide that consistency for all proposed special license plates. The bill would also simplify the process for distributing funds from the issuance of a first-time license plate exempt from smog checks. Unfortunately, in trying to simplify this distribution process last session with Assembly Bill 63, we inadvertently made that process more complicated. So this bill would undo that and get it back to a simpler process. And we will be working with legal staff to make sure that the distribution process that we adopt going forward will be actually simpler. Finally, this bill also deals with an issue of movement permits. So currently, you need a movement permit, excuse me, or a registration to drive your vehicle legally on Nevada's highways. But what happens if you buy your vehicle on a weekend and the DMV is closed? How do you get that movement permit? Excuse me. What this bill would do is give individuals up to 3 days to allow when they buy a vehicle through a private sale, like after hours or on a weekend. It would give them 3 days to come into the DMV and get that movement permit, a little bit of a grace period, so they can take care of their DMV business. And finally, on the last slide, excuse me, slide 14, I just want to highlight the fact that the department opened a new office in Reno on November 2nd, 2020. And if you haven't had the opportunity visit that office, I would welcome the opportunity to showcase it to you because it really is a spectacular office. It replaces our office on Galletti Way. We also had an office in Sparks to conduct commercial driver's license transactions, and this is a one-stop shop for both those types of transactions, for non-commercial and commercial. It features a first in the nation drive-through kiosk, which is really amazing. We get a lot of business through for that. And it's just a really beautiful building that we're incredibly proud of, and would welcome the opportunity to show that to you if your schedules allow. So I want to thank you, Chairman Romoreno, for your time today and the community time, and my staff and I are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Director Butler. I know that we do have a few questions, but I'm going to start off with our first question for BDR 2188102564. I know that is going to go to our money committees, but can you tell us what the anticipated cost for the division name change and technology fees will be?
Thank you for the question, Chairman Romoreno. Julie Butler for the record. We do not anticipate any costs to change our name. We don't use pre-printed letterhead. We just print those. It's a print as you go type of thing, and so we don't anticipate costs to change the dictionary or those types of things. In terms of the $1 technology fee, historically, the department has generated about $7 million per fiscal year from the technology fee, and this bill would seek to continue that collection of the $1 technology fee through the anticipated life of the transformation project through June 30th of 2026.
Perfect. Thank you. First up, I have a list here. It will be Assemblywoman Peters with her questions.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation. I have really a clarifying question, I hope. On slide 9, you give a revenue breakdown with the percent decrease or increase over the 2 fiscal years, 20 and 21. And I was trying to figure out what line item other highway funds is versus taxes. Can you just give us a brief description of those two different entities? And then can you also go into what was the cause of the 99.6% decrease in those other highway funds?
Thank you for the question, Julie Butler for the record. I believe that this has to do with the conversion of the general services tax commissions from the highway fund, to the general fund. But I'm going to phone a friend, and I am going to ask our administrator of our administrative services division, Angela Smith Lamb. She is on the call and can answer that question. Okay, she apparently is not on the call today. I will get back to you with the exact answer for that question, and Assemblywoman Peters. But I do believe it has to do with the transfer of those governmental services tax commissions.
Can you send that directly to staff so we can have access to that, please?
Absolutely, I sure will.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions, Assemblywoman Peters?
Maybe I think some other folks may ask questions that I've got. So yeah, I'll touch base with you after.
All right. The next on my list would be Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you very much, Chair Danielle Monroe-Moreno. Thank you, Ms. Butler, for your presentation. And I have a question about your comment regarding online driving school. Now, earlier in your presentation, you mentioned that some of these technological advances you all want to implement, you are mirroring from the state of California. Is this also something that they do or another state within the nation does with online driving schools?
Thank you for the question. Julie Butler, again, for the record. Are you asking about whether or not we license them or just that we partner with the drive schools to administer the exam?
Your SB 17 partnering with the drive schools to allow them to administer examinations.
Julie Butler, again, for the record. So those are two separate things. So Senate Bill 17 just recognizes that we license drive schools, and what this change would mean is that we will license the brick and mortar drive schools, but we will also license those that provide drive instruction online. And so that's what that bill does. Separately, through the regulatory process, we have embarked upon a partnership with the drive schools to get them certified to administer drive exams. So because what we've seen through the pandemic and we hear from constituents constantly is their teenagers can't get in to get their drive exams. And, unfortunately, I just don't have the staff right now and the appointment availability to make a dent in that. All I can tell them is, I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait your 90 days till we have an opening. But gee, if we license these people to teach people how to drive anyway, why aren't we also extending that license to have them the capability of certifying that they're competent on the roads, which is essentially what our drive examiners do anyway. So that way it takes some of that burden off the department. And so if you're a member of the public and you want to pay, maybe it costs you a little more, but you can get in 30 days or 20 days versus waiting 90 days for the department. We wanted to give the public that option. I don't know if any other states are doing that. That's something we could reach out through our association of motor vehicle agencies. It's a nationwide and international association to find out. But this is something we thought might be an innovative solution for the product.
Thank you, Ms. Butler. Chairwoman, may I please have a follow-up question? Thank you.
Of course.
So Ms. Butler, my concern is twofold. Whether or not we would be losing good paying government jobs to a contractor, an outside contractor, for one. And secondly, this program would have to be monitored and there's some type of quantifiable process to make sure that things were being done in a manner that is acceptable to your department. So how many jobs do you think of drive instructors, folks who administer these exams already, would be lost? And how many people do you think, or have you even begun to calculate, you would need as far as staff to monitor this new program?
Thank you for the question, Julie Butler, again, for the record. We don't anticipate that we're going to lose any jobs by going down this road. Again, this is totally optional for the customers. It's not required. If our customers want to pay, maybe get in sooner, great. But there are going to be those that can't afford to or don't want to. And our population is growing, particularly in the Las Vegas Valley. And we have seen just over the past year, the number of people coming in and surrendering their licenses from out of state is huge. And so, I don't anticipate this is a supplement to rather than a replacement of the department services. In terms of the impact for staff to monitor, we're already licensing these drive schools anyway. So we think the impact to monitor them and make sure that they are providing an approved curriculum, we already have to approve that anyway. So we think that any additional workload impact for compliance monitoring would be minimal.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm having IT issues over here. I apologize. Okay, next up we have Assemblyman Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to ask some questions. Judy, it's good seeing you again. I got a couple questions. As I've been trying to get a hold of you, but it's impossible almost to get a hold of somebody at DMV. But I'd like to, number one, I'd like to talk about SB 29. I see you got a third party that's going to issue the salvage titles. I just bought a Jeep that was from Elko, from who we knew that had a title, and it went to the auction, but yet they issued a salvage title. Why would they do that?
Julie Butler, again, for the record. That could be for a variety of reasons that might happen. The department has a system that it checks, a national system that it checks before it issues titles. And it could be that that's how the vehicle was branded in the past. And so I'm going to actually turn this question over to April Sanborn and Yvonne Young-Brown staff. They're here today, and you can really delve into the details and provide a much better explanation than I.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, April Sanborn, DMV for the record. So, and thank you for the question, Assemblyman Ellison. So essentially, there's, as the Director Butler just stated, that there could be many reasons. But some of the main reasons are the fact that the vehicle was rendered non-repairable to the point where the value of the vehicle is great, or the damage to the vehicle is greater than the value of the vehicle.
Follow up, Madam Chairman. The reason I'm asking this is because this vehicle was never inspected by anybody. It was running great when I pulled it out of there. The only thing I did do is I restore vehicles. So when I got this out of there, I started tearing the thing apart, and then I show up with the salvage title when I hit a clear title, so that nobody ever seen the Jeep and seen it with any kind of bad damage or anything. So that just kind of confuses, the process. So I should have been able to take the title down to DMV, and now I got to go through a process of a salvage title. And salvage titles derate the vehicle. So I'm hoping maybe we can get this straightened up, but that's just one of the questions I have. And then I'm glad you guys are going to address SB 60 on the license plates. It's getting kind of confusing on some of the stuff. But one thing I do have is for Judy is I have a bill that I'm going to run through, and I'm hoping that I can get with you prior to the session. So I've been trying to contact you. So if you can contact my office here at the legislature, I'd like to set up and spend some time with you.
Julie Butler, again, for the record. Assemblyman Ellison, I would be happy to contact you and also have staff reach out to you with regard specifically to your title issue.
Yeah, Judy, thank you. And actually, I could have drove it down to DMV and had them check it, but I wanted to go ahead and tear the thing apart and restore it. And, it's a 1947 Willys Jeep, so I want this thing in great shape when I put it on the highway. So yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Director. I'm sure that this will be a very interesting conversation that you two will have about his bills. Next up in the queue, I have Assemblywoman Brown May with a few questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Butler, thank you for your very detailed presentation. I appreciate the effort and the time that you've spent. My question is relative to the wait list that we're currently experiencing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the necessary shutdowns. Specifically in District 42, we have a very active DMV office, and often in the mornings, there's a huge line outside. And I can tell you that there are several people that I'm personally familiar with that are waiting the 90-day period and check your calendar daily. So I'm curious to know, what really is the time frame do you anticipate for alleviating this backlog? Is it hopeful? I'm hoping.
Julie Butler, again for the record. Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. You and me both. We, there's not a good answer for that. And let me just explain a little bit of where the department is at. And our main issue right now is twofold. It's staff, and then it's no-shows on the appointments. So in terms of the staff, as you all know, when the pandemic hit and we had to close our offices, our revenues absolutely fell off a cliff. And so at that point, the governor's office instituted a statewide hiring freeze. We eliminated, we were asked to curtail our overtime. And so we have. And then because we can't spend more that's in the checkbook, per se, constitutionally, we can't deficit spend. We, in order to meet available projected highway fund revenues, we found ourselves in a position of having to cut staff. And so we've been holding positions vacant for the last year in order to meet available projected revenues. And so the issue with the reason you see those long lines outside are a combination of I've got positions that we've got positions we can't fill because we can't spend more than is in the checkbook. And then we've got furloughs, again, can't spend more than is in the checkbook. So I've got those staffing issues. Plus, we've got our regular issues of people are retiring, people are seeking other jobs, people get sick, people have had COVID, and we've had extended absences. So it's really a numbers game. At the same time, over the past year, we've had 79,900 people come into Nevada from out of state and surrender an out of state driver's license and license plates. That's just the folks we know of. That's not counting the hordes of people you see out there every single day at every one of our offices that can't get in. And then we have the people that make an appointment that then either they do their business online or they're able to get in sooner by some miracle, and then they don't cancel, which just pushes things out for everybody else. So it's really a combination of all of those factors that I can't really provide where's the light at the end of the tunnel. I think the light at the end of the tunnel is going to come through our transformation effort if funded, and we're able to move these services online. I think that's the only way we are going to be able to survive in the face of the staffing challenges and the increase in the population, particularly in the Las Vegas Valley.
Thank you. I think we're right along with you relative to finding a solution. I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the question. I have Assemblyman Roberts next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question was right in line with the last one, but more specifically on the no-shows. And are you trying to do anything specifically to curtail the no-shows? I mean, I don't know if you could do similar to a doctor's office or somewhere else. Every transaction has a fee, whether they pay some of that up front for their appointment or whatever. I don't know, but are you working for solutions, or are we basically going to wait for to move more things online? Try to get some feel for that.
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman Roberts. Julie Butler again for the record. We do not currently have the authority to do like our doctors offices do and charge for no-shows. If that is something that the legislature has an appetite to allow us to do, we would. I think that might certainly help to curtail that. Short of that, we continue to put out in our media releases and with our public information officers, continue to do their on-camera interviews and put the notice on our website to remind the public if they cannot keep their appointments.
Yeah, I missed the last part. If they don't keep their what?
We have been reaching out through our public information officers to put messages on the website and also in the media interviews that they give to remind the public to cancel their appointments if they can't come.
Okay, so thank you. But other than that, not really, just kind of dealing with it as it goes and hopefully to move more people online.
We are, and to the extent that individuals show up and hope they can be seen by DMV on any given day, to the extent we have cancellations, we do try to work the public in, so we don't just have staff sitting there doing nothing. And so, we're trying to take a variety of approaches, but certainly if that's something that this body would entertain, some sort of no-show fee, we'd take it.
I mean, I don't know that necessarily is the answer, but if you have a 50% no-show ratio routinely, then you would be able to take in, unless you hold that appointment time vacant, you should be able to process people waiting person that much faster. But I don't understand the workflow, but anything to help with that would be great. Just where you're going with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Roberts. And I have a question along that line for both Assemblyman Roberts' question and Assemblywoman Brown's May. When you look at those long lines, is the department thinking about putting any new measures or thought into inclement weather? When we came up here a week ago, it was snowing outside, but in southern Nevada, temperatures can get up to 115 degrees and you have people standing outside. So what will the department do moving forward to alleviate those lines, especially during those harsh weather times?
Thank you for the question. Julie Butler again for the record. So what you're seeing there is really a function of the COVID capacity restrictions. So we, throughout the past year, have had to deal with several complaints through the Nevada Occupational Safety and Health Administration regarding our COVID protocols. And those complaints have come in from the public. They've also come in from our staff. And as a result, we've had the OSHA's SCAT, Safety Consultation and Training Section, do a field service audit on all of our 18 offices statewide. What SCATS has recommended is that in order to maintain the social distancing is that we get rid of the chairs in the lobby and that we have people standing outside and we maintain that 6-foot separation. For us to put the chairs back in the lobby, what would be required of us would be to disinfect the chairs after every single customer visit. So then it becomes a matter of numbers. So I can either have my staff manning a window or I can have them squirting off chairs. So what we have opted to do is have people wait outside, except if, and we have tried really hard to accommodate those with disabilities and the elderly. We do have a limited number of chairs in the lobby for that population, but that's really the function of the pandemic. Again, long term, as we move those services online, we're hoping that the problem over time goes away because you won't have to come to the office to do your business. There's some changes on the federal side with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the Real ID Act that will allow the department and DMVs nationwide to accept certain identity documents electronically. We're really looking forward to that in the future. As part of our transformation to allow a lot of the services that we provide to be provided online. And so as we move forward, we hope that this problem will lessen.
So thank you for that. But just to follow up on it, most people arrive in a vehicle. Some do arrive on a bus, but if they arrive in a vehicle, would there be a way to do a numbering system and a person could wait in their car in the safety and comfort of their vehicle, either with the heater on or air conditioning on, considering whatever the weather is? Has that thought gone through? And
yeah, Julie Butler again for the record. We do actually do that. We tell people when we can see them. We have a through our queue system a program called mobile ticketing, where we will send the customer a text message and say when their time is up. And so we do tell them, go wait in your vehicle, go wait, go home and come back later when your appointment time. What we're seeing in our offices is that the customers are refusing to leave. We don't know that if they're not trusting that their spot will be there when they get back, or exactly what. And Tanya Laney is our administrator of our field services division and is on the call. Administrator Laney, if you would, can you add some more details to that, please?
Yes, for the record, Tanya Laney, Administrator, Field Services Division for the Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles. Thank you for the question, Chair. Director Butler is exactly correct. We have two different processes that we're using for the offices for customers in place of them having to stand outside. We either offer them the mobile ticket option, or we actually have a paper ticket that we'll give them if they're not comfortable using their cell phone or simply don't have one. And then we ask the customer to come back at a time that we know that we'll be able to see them. Now, when they come back, they may have to wait 10 to 15 minutes still outside as they're waiting for that line to move in because of the social distancing. We are setting up what you call feeder lines in our metro offices, where we do have as many customers indoors as we can with that 6 feet of social distancing standing in front of windows, and then maybe 2 or 3 windows are assigned to those feeder lines to pull those customers to the windows immediately for twofold reasons. One, so that we don't have that many customers standing outside, and two, so that we don't have a gap in between when the customer is done being served at the window and when the next one is called. So we're getting that customer to the window right away when the customer in front of them is finished. But we do offer those two different solutions to customers. But we are seeing where there's a resistance and they just are, again, we don't know what it is. If they're afraid to leave, if they have already driven there, so they figure I'm just going to stand here and wait because they know when they're going to be seen. So it could be 8 o'clock in the morning when we first open. We're telling them we can't see them until 2, and they will still stand there and wait until 2 o'clock.
Interesting. Thank you.
Very welcome.
I have 2 more. We'll have Assemblyman Wheeler and then Assemblywoman Peters with a follow-up question.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Ms. Butler, I get 2 types of phone calls every day. One is what's wrong with Dieter, and the other one is what's wrong with the DMV. And you and I have spoken during the interim on some of these things. But what I'm wondering is the main ones that I get from my constituents are, let's say we have a registration that's due in January, but they can't get an appointment until February. Or they try to go online and there's a problem and their insurance, you say their insurance is lapsed, they say they haven't. And so what can we do? Are we fining people, or are we putting extra fees on people who are late anymore? I know at the beginning we weren't doing that during the pandemic, but I think that's expired. And I just wanted to catch up on that. Do we still fine people for being late on their registration or not having their insurance in when actually it was, but they can't get a hold of you to tell you about it? What's the procedure there now?
Julie Butler for the record, and I'm going to give you a wonderful bureaucratic answer, which is it depends. In some cases where the customer could have done the registration online and didn't, and now we find them sitting in front of us at a customer service window, and they just, for whatever reason, didn't pay, yes, we might fine them because they were driving their car. They admit to our technicians they were driving their car. They just didn't register it. So yeah, sometimes we fine them. If it's a case where, maybe they switched insurance companies and somehow that the department didn't get timely record of that, and it looks like on their side their insurance lapsed, yeah, we'll take that into consideration and waive that fine. So it kind of depends on the circumstances, but most people, particularly for just a simple renewal, there's really no excuse why. There are legitimately people that don't have an internet connection, but for most of the population, I will say there's really no excuse why they can't do that transaction online. They don't need to make an appointment for that. The registration document and the decal will arrive in the mail 7 to 10 business days later. It is active right at the time they pay for the transaction online. So regardless of what color their sticker is, if law enforcement runs them, it will show in the system that they paid and it's current. And that's really the message we're trying to get out to people.
Okay. Yeah, it's not the calls I've been getting. What I've been getting is they can't do it online because, I don't know, maybe they're putting in the wrong information, whatever. I did mine online, it was fine. But and then they try to get a hold of someone and they can't get an appointment to get in there for 90 days or whatever. And in the meantime, their registration is going to lapse and they have to drive the vehicle to get to work or, in my district to go skiing, which is more important.
Yes.
But so in that case, they say they can't get it done online for whatever reason, their fault, your fault, whatever. Is that a fine?
Julie Butler for the record. We have still been asking the Nevada Sheriff's and Chiefs Association to extend people some grace, recognizing the issue that we're in, that there legitimately are the lack of available appointments. There are certain circumstances where legitimately, if you buy your car, if you buy a new car from your neighbor, you can't do that online. We get that. There are those particular cases, but if it's a car you've owned it for the past 10 years, there's no reason that you need to come in to do that. So it just kind of depends. It's a fluid situation. There's not really any good answers. We need to ask law enforcement to use their judgment and exercise some leniency and feel our way through this thing.
Hey, thank you very much. Yeah, they're not talking about law enforcement, though. They're talking about your fine, not law enforcement fines.
Okay.
You.
Thank you, Assemblyman Wheeler. And that brings us up to our last question. It will be from Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair. And if I could make a comment, I think that there's also an issue with folks trying to balance getting to the DMV and also their day job. And there aren't protections for people in missing their day job hours to go to the DMV. So that's also something to consider about that time frame, people either being there or not being able to make their appointments. My question is related to contracting out or licensing online entities for certifying drivers. Have you guys looked at what the liability would look like for these entities to certify drivers to be road ready? And if not, I just hope that you do consider that in the process, because I think that could be an unintended consequence of moving forward.
Thank you. And I have Julie Butler again for the record. On the phone with me is our chief of our Compliance Enforcement Division, J.D. Decker. His division actually is responsible for licensing these drive schools. And JD, could you speak to the Assemblywoman's comment/question, please?
Sure. JD Decker for the record. Thank you for the question. I know that the department, so we've licensed drive schools, drive instructors for a number of years. And we do regular audits to make sure that they're complying with the training requirements that that are in the NRS currently. So we've got a program that's relatively robust after the 2019 legislature granted an additional employee specifically for drive schools. So we think we're ready to roll out a number of different programs related to drive schools. And one of them, it would be an auditing function for which someone mentioned previously, where we would have to go out and audit the testing that the department might contract out, but we feel that we could make sure that they were up to the standards that our own employees use to certify drivers.
So I guess my question kind of rounds into when the DMV certifies, the state takes on the liability of saying this person is qualified to be on the road. When a private third-party entity does that, does the state then, in licensing them to give that certification, take on the liability, or will they have a responsibility to ensuring that drivers are actually road ready, and if something does happen, will be held accountable for that?
JD Decker, for the record. Thank you for the question. We actually have discussed that with the Attorney General's office. The department will be responsible for making sure that the schools are complying with the requirements for training and testing. But all that the department is doing is certify that they've met the prerequisites for being issued a license. We don't, any more than we currently do, issuing a license isn't the state's testimony that this person is certified to be a good driver any more than it would be today. So if they meet the requirements to obtain a license, then the state would issue that license, but the individual driver or the school would still be liable for any negligence in training or testing that person.
All right, sounds like you have the right heads in the room. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I could circle back to Assemblywoman Peters' question about the other highway funds. I did get clarification on that particular question.
Go ahead, Director Butler.
Great, thank you. Julie Butler for the record. So several legislative sessions ago, the depreciation schedule was changed on the taxes, the basic governmental services taxes, and as a result of that depreciation change, there was a pot of money that was generated from that. And years ago, that money used to go to the highway fund. And then in the last legislative session, 2019, there was a legislative change to say 75% of that money went to the highway fund and 25% went to the general fund. Then as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and revenues falling off a cliff, in order to avert further devastating cuts, the 31st special legislative session diverted all of those funds to the highway fund, or excuse me, to the general fund. So the reason for that 99% drop is that that's money that used to go to the highway fund, that 25 million. Now only 101,000 went there because that money went to the general fund to offset those devastating cuts in the general fund. So and this gets into a larger presentation that I made in front of the money committees last week in our department's overview, but our Department of Public Safety, Department of Transportation depends on that money being there in the highway fund to fund our ongoing operations, and our budget was predicated on some of that money being restored. So those will be decisions, for this session of the legislature on whether or not that funding will be restored to the highway fund and to what extent.
Thank you so much for the follow-up and clarification. That makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to make sure I was reading it in the right context.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you. That brings us to the end of this presentation and the discussion. And I'd like to thank the Department of Motor Vehicles and Director Butler for presenting to us today. Director Butler, I know there was a lot of issues at the beginning of your presentation and we weren't able to get everything down on the record. So I'm going to ask you to send your written comments to our committee manager so that it can be accurately put into our minutes for the meeting.
Julie Butler for the record. I would be happy to, Madam Chair, and thank you again for the opportunity today.
Thank you so much. You have a wonderful day. Next, we'll welcome Director Sarwell from Nevada's Department of Transportation, who will give us an overview of the agency. Director, if you are in the queue, the floor is all yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I am going to share my screen. And for the record, I was tuned in at the last session, and all my tech was going well until right at Director Butler's last question, and I got kicked out. So hopefully everything goes better for me. We're all learning to be patient with the tech issues. So again, thank you. I'm Christina Swallow. I'm the director of the Nevada DOT, and it is truly my pleasure to tell you more about our program and join the longer conversation about growth and infrastructure in our state. To start, I wanted to offer a brief refresher on who we are as a department. At our core, NDOT's goal is to keep Nevadans and visitors safe and connected wherever they may be on our vast transportation system. From cleaning up litter to repairing guardrails to building hundreds of millions of dollars in road projects and cutting-edge traffic monitoring systems to responding to earthquake, wildfire, blizzard, and other urgent events right alongside our first responders. We truly do it all. NDOT is responsible for the planning, construction, operation, and maintenance of more than 14,000 lane miles of highway, of which 70% are located in rural Nevada, and more than 1,200 bridges. While we are proud to be one of the largest builders of infrastructure in the state, we also recognize and embrace our role as stewards of the environment. And to that end, we look forward to being a key partner in helping the state of Nevada reach our greenhouse gas emission goals. Our NDOT is overseen by a 7-member board, which is chaired by the governor. We have 3 distinct districts, each headed by a district engineer, shown on the slide in front of you. District 1 is primarily Southern Nevada and headquartered in Las Vegas. District 2 is in primarily the Reno area, Western Nevada, headquartered in Reno. And District 3 is in Northeastern Nevada, headquartered in Elko. We also have major maintenance stations in Tonopah, Ely, and Winnemucca. And you can see on here all of the yellow dots are locations of our 45 maintenance stations throughout the state, where 740 personnel are stationed to truly make sure that we can provide 24-hour, 7-day-a-week services to our traveling public. I wanted to talk a little bit about population and Bmt growth, and I'm going to talk about this again later on in the presentation, but just a little bit of a highlight. Between 2012 and 2018, Nevada's population grew more than 14%, while the number of licensed vehicles or registered vehicles grew by 21%. While only about 19% of Nevada's roads are on the state-maintained system, this 19% carries 70% of all truck traffic and half of all vehicle traffic. We maintain the roads that get food, vaccines, and other supplies to Nevada families, and we connect rural and urban communities alike, attracting tourism and helping businesses expand. But we are not just a highway agency. We're not just roads and bridges. We are a multimodal system that supports travel by pedestrian, rail, bike, air, and bus. NDOT also manages the majority of federal funding for Nevada's rural transit programs throughout the state. And I should focus, we have no role in urban transit, just rural transit, offering over 5 million rides annually for the disabled, elderly, and others in rural Nevada. I mentioned emergency response. So on top of maintenance, our crews are on the scene day and night whenever there's an emergency. During wildfires, NDOT often sets up traffic controls and road closures as needed. We have also supplied water tankers with operators. Our operators sometimes step in to help. We offer the use of our fuel sites that are located across the state for emergency events to local agencies and first responders. And we directly support fire personnel day and night. Back in June of 2020, rain prompted a significant mudslide on State Route 140, about 100 miles north of Winnemucca. Mud was up to 12 feet deep in one location and spread over 3 miles. Fortunately, no one was injured in the event. However, there were several vehicles that were trapped in the slide. Multiple NDOT maintenance crews from Quinn River, Orovada, and Winnemucca responded quickly and worked around the clock to clear the mud and rocks. The prompt response by NDOT crews ensured all mud was cleared away and the road was reopened in approximately 2.5 days. And in May of last year, NDOT had to respond to the largest earthquake in the state in over 60 years. Just south of Mina in Nevada, north of Tonopah, we were able to reopen US 95 between US Route 6 and State Route 360 in Esmeralda and Mineral counties following the 6.5 magnitude earthquake within actually earlier than expected. And within, I think it was 6 hours that we were able to repair the road. And you can see on this slide, there was a significant cracking, and actually you can't see the differential settlement, but there was approximately a 4-inch bump in US 95 at that location. So we did need to do an emergency closure and repair to get it functional again, so traveling public on 95 could get to where they were going. And day to day, we are there. National statistics show that for every minute a freeway lane is blocked, the resulting traffic congestion takes 4 minutes to clear, and the chance of a secondary crash increases significantly. Our freeway service patrol vehicles, which operate in Las Vegas metro area and the Reno Sparks metro area, patrol fixed freeway routes, helping to keep freeways clear by assisting motorists to remove stalled vehicles, extinguishing minor vehicle fires, providing traffic control and safety at incident scenes, and sometimes even providing that very basic first aid prior to the arrival of paramedics. We have also worked together with our traffic safety partners and traffic incident management coalitions to detect, respond to, and remove traffic incidents. Since 2008, we have trained 5,000 of the state's 8,000 first responders to implement safe, quick clearance of traffic incidents. And due to our emphasis on traffic safety, some areas of Las Vegas have seen secondary crashes cut in half in just 5 years. And we do support our rural communities. The majority of our network is comprised of roads in rural parts of the state. In fact, 86% of our centerline miles, 70% of our total lane miles are in rural Nevada. In 2019, NDOT dedicated over $200 million towards projects in rural areas. This money went to new construction, preservation, and other projects in counties outside Washoe and Clark. While these roads are outside our urban areas, they are critical to ensuring the products we rely on can get to the stores and our homes, and ensure that we can safely get to the beautiful parts of the state that Nevadans love to recreate in. And ongoing regular maintenance prolongs the lives of these roads and is cheaper than replacement due to deferred maintenance. So let's start getting into the meat and potatoes. I'd like to talk first about our highway fund revenue. State highways maintained by NDOT are funded primarily with highway user revenue and federal funds. I should note that federal funds are basically federal fuel tax that's collected at the pump. It goes to the federal government and then it gets sent back to us. We are fortunate in that we get more money back than we contribute as a state. So we are a donee state and benefit from that. These taxes are placed into our state highway fund. And the federal government, so those federal fuel taxes and additional funding we receive, accounts for about 1/3 of our revenue. The remainder is state collected. I do want to note that this shows FY19 numbers, and we're showing this because this is more representative of a typical year than fiscal year 20 was. The State Highway Fund is a special revenue fund established to account for the receipt and expenditure of these dedicated highway user revenue. The majority of the State Highway Fund finances Department of Transportation. NDOT is not supported by any general funds. A significant amount of the operating costs of the DMV and DPS, primarily Highway Patrol, are also supported by appropriations from the Highway Fund. And typically there are other minor appropriations or transfers to other agencies. I should note that the federal aid is primarily fuel taxes, but the state revenue is only a little bit more than 50% fuel taxes. So overall, our fund is about half fuel taxes and half other sources. As you can see, that includes vehicle and other registration fees, motor carrier fees, licensing fees. So it is primarily user revenue, but it's not all directly linked to the use of the roadway network. I wanted to touch for a minute on highlighting one unique aspect of the revenue generated for the State Highway Fund. It is constitutionally protected. Specifically, we are governed by Article 9, Section 5 of the Nevada Constitution, which limits gas tax revenue, user revenue as a whole, to highway expenditures. Since enactment in the 30s, this constitutional provision has been important in ensuring that NDOT has had sufficient funding to build and maintain the roads and highways. However, it's not without its faults. The language has limited NDOT from using the funding towards operations, and we are increasingly becoming a more operations-driven organization. And none of it can be used for transit. And while there is a lot of conversation about how we fund transit, urban transit is key to our ability to move everyone in Nevada in a sustainable, safe and sustainable way. And we do need to figure out how to fund transit in the long run. All right, let's look at how the State Highway Fund is spent. As I mentioned, the majority of it goes to NDOT. Of the $1.1 billion in fiscal 19, NDOT spent $929 million, which did include $112 million of bond proceeds that were received in fiscal year 18. On an annual basis, our revenues, the revenues allocated to the department are typically close to $800 million. And how do we spend this money? So it provides a look back, and you can see from fiscal year 2009 to 2019, 78% of the expenditures went towards construction and engineering, 16% towards maintenance, operations, and equipment, and 6% towards administrative and support services. And the right chart, the chart on the right, shows our budget request for the next biennium. It's important to note that the fluctuations you see in spending are due to many factors, including projects and their specific payment curves. Because of the federal obligation process, we have to fully obligate our federal funding when we go to award the contract, but the spending may occur over a variety of years. So the spending does fluctuate even though the budget does not. I did want to talk a little bit about COVID. COVID has definitely had a negative impact on vehicle volumes on our roads, and therefore the revenue generated for the highway fund. This reflects our count stations. We've highlighted a few count stations across the state to show how significantly it has impacted our the travel on the roads. It doesn't exactly align with our fuel revenue simply because we get different proportions from freight versus from regular vehicles, and truck traffic has remained strong throughout the pandemic. But you can see during the first quarter of the pandemic, there was a significant drop in driving across the state, and it has not yet fully recovered. While I-80, and that's where the count in Elko is on I-80, I-80 had recovered during the holiday season. It has fallen back a little bit. So we're going to continue to monitor this as we move forward. Highway fund revenue projections. So the fuel tax revenue has proven, fortunately, to be far more resilient than other revenues that fund state programs. In fiscal year 20, highway revenue deposited into the fund was 6% lower than fiscal year 19 levels. DMV is currently projecting for the biennium that that fuel revenue will remain 8% lower than actual fiscal year 19. Based on our observations, we anticipate this is conservative, and we'll provide updates to all the legislators as we get updated information from the DMV. In our budget request, when you get to that point of discussing budget, we have 8 items to replace our aging equipment, buy new equipment, maintain buildings and grounds of facilities, fill critical vacancies, fund a new category of student worker positions for high school workers to help create a better pipeline into state service, further fund our fuel system, replace our radio system, change some classified positions, and some technology investments. And if you have any questions on any of these, I'm happy to follow up with the committee or individual legislators with more information at that time. So how has our system grown? As our state has dramatically grown in recent years, so has the system. This chart represents lane mile growth for all roads in the state, not just NDOT's, from over 72,000 miles in 2008 to 102 in 2018, a 42% increase in just 10 years. NDOT's roads have only increased by about 800 lane miles, so roughly a 6% increase in that time frame. And as I've noted before, our state system now supports more than 50% of all vehicle traffic in the state. And every lane mile that's added, whether it's a lane mile that's added by NDOT or a lane mile added by a local agency, comes with a maintenance liability of approximately $20,000 per year. And we don't spend that $20,000 per year every year, but we like to have it so that we can. It's just like an oil change for your car. You don't need to do it every month, but you do need to do it. And if we don't have that as an available resource to spend when we need to, it allows that deferred maintenance increases the cost of the maintenance and preservation at a later date significantly. Along that time frame, we've also seen a significant growth in our VMT, our vehicles mile traveled across the network. This slide shows vehicle miles since 1993. From 2008 to 2018, vehicle miles traveled increased about 30%, and our projections indicate over the next 10 years it will go up by another 30%. And you might expect that that makes sense because our state is growing, and as our state grows, there's more people and they're driving, and so VMT should naturally increase. But what we've actually found is that VMT is outpacing growth. So if VMT was just matching population, the curve would be the same. But you can see per capita, people are driving more every year. This is in part because of land development patterns in Nevada. And without a shift in our land use policies across the state, VMT per capita will likely continue to increase at a rate higher than population growth, challenging both us and the local agencies to keep up with travel demands, and ultimately inhibit our ability to achieve our statewide greenhouse gas emission goals. This chart, and I'm sorry, I'm giving you a lot of charts, and I'm glad you have a copy of the PowerPoint in front of you so you can like go back and chew on them a little bit, and we're always happy to answer questions later if you have them. Represents the VMT, so vehicle miles traveled, versus highway fund revenue, normalized to 2008. And really what I want you to see on this are the dashed lines, the dashed orange line on the top and the light blue dashed line on the bottom. The orange line is the growth in VMT. The light blue line on the bottom is the growth in highway fund revenue, specifically the fuel revenue registration fees outside of the GST. You can see that they're diverging. And that's important to note because with the combination of rising inflation, construction costs, increased fuel efficiency, we are collecting less revenue than we need, to the tune of an annual shortfall of approximately $500 million for roadways alone outside of any other programmatic needs. So let's talk a little bit about planning. Since our revenue is not keeping pace with our demands, we must be as efficient as possible with our resources, ensuring we're getting the maximum benefit to Nevadans for years to come. Our One Nevada plan is a unified plan that was completed in 2018, just prior to the last biennium, that brought the entire state together to establish goals on how we should drive our program forward. The plan provides a common foundation and shared policy framework for making informed, transparent, and responsive transportation investments across the state. It helps us be performance-based on future transportation projects that will continue to best meet the needs and goals of the state. The final phase of the NDOT, the One Nevada plan, is the STIP, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, which is the state's transportation capital improvement plan. We work on the STIP with the Federal Highway Division and the Federal Transit Association, as well as our state's 4 MPOs in Las Vegas, Washoe County, Carson City, and Tahoe. I have to take a breath. I'm trying to get through this as fast as I can, so there's time for questions. So some major projects, I wanted to highlight some major projects for you. I should note that the capital program in this biennial budget is $1.088 billion, less than what's shown on the slide because the slide actually represents 3 fiscal years. So those projects that have already gone or are getting ready to go this year, as well as those that may that are anticipated to go in the biennium. But we wanted you to be aware of these because these may overlap the biennium and the spending. So I wanted you to be aware of them. You can see in Southern Nevada, a couple of the projects are already well underway. The I-15-215 interchange in the Northeast Valley, the Centennial, the final phase of the Centennial Bowl in the Northwest Valley, Tropicana, the Tropicana interchange reconstruction project. We're anticipating that to get going later this year, and many others. We also have some in rural Nevada, the ongoing Ely downtown reconstruction project, passing lanes throughout the state, and some in Washoe County, including the Reno Spaghetti Bowl Express that's well underway, and the Pyramid Highway that we anticipate moving soon. One of the great things about our program is that we are able to help support our economy in a major way. And we do that by supporting thousands of jobs each year. Investment in transportation not only reduces travel times, creates safer roads, improves quality of life, and but it also provides millions of dollars in economic activity for our communities. This federal fiscal year to date, so starting October 1 to today, our program has added over 2,000 or has supported over 2,000 job years. And for the last federal fiscal year ending in September of 2020, we were able to support over 8,600 job years for Nevadans. We have 4 bills I want to put on your radar for this legislative session. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these because I know we're running short on time. But AB 12 revises provisions regarding the qualifications for the deputy director and chief engineer. We found that the current qualifications are too narrow, and we really wanted to broaden it so we can broaden the pool and increase the diversity of qualified applicants. The second bill, AB 41, aims to revise provisions related to operations of certain oversized vehicles. Really, this is intended to provide clarity on how we measure the loads, allow for slightly larger loads in some instances, and transition to an all online application process. AB 53 modifies the requirements for a callback system on certain highways. We currently maintain a callback system on I-15 south of Las Vegas. That system is obsolete. Our neighboring states have primarily eliminated all of their callback systems as well. The nature of how we travel and how we communicate has changed. And further, we're concerned about the safety of our travelers on the roadway and making sure that we provide a system that's most flexible so that they can get the information they need and also stay safe should they have an emergency. And the last one is AB 54, which formalizes an advisory committee to study issues and make recommendations to state and local agencies to improve traffic safety. There is an existing committee. It is housed within NDOT. We're looking to formalize that committee and improve their voice when it comes to improving traffic safety across the state. In addition to our bills and monitoring all of the bills that we expect from the legislators, there are two specific bills that I wanted to put on your radar that we are tracking closely and have worked with legislators on already. One of which, as we noted before, I actually didn't note it before, would be to amend the state constitution to expand the permissible uses of the state highway fund. We are engaged in that conversation and look forward to the conversation with you as it moves forward. And the other would require NDOT to commission a study and form a dynamic stakeholder working group to comprehensively assess the future of transportation funding in our state. These bills are critical, and they're critical also to us as NDOT and to us as a state in ensuring that our transportation system can continue to meet the needs of all Nevadans. And we do truly look forward to continuing to work with you on those bills. And then lastly, I do want to talk to you about our role in the state's climate future. As Nevada's statewide transportation agency, we have to address head on the fact that transportation is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the state. We have been proud to be a key partner in the effort to reduce emissions, both at the agency and statewide levels. NDOT currently serves as the pilot state agency to develop policies and strategies to assess and reduce greenhouse gas emissions within our agency. And we've already identified numerous areas for emission reduction as part of the state's climate action plan. It is, however, imperative that we use this time to think critically about all potential outcomes of our ideas. For instance, NDOT supports and encourages electric vehicles as a critical means of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We know that is the future. However, the reduced tailpipe emissions that come with increased vehicle EV adoption is not enough to meet Nevada's ambitious climate goals. If you recall my VMT slide, we are continuing to drive further and further, and the adoption rate of the EVs just isn't fast enough to overcome that. This has been shown in other states that are a few years ahead of us in this EV space. The challenging reality is that, as I said, we're outdriving the benefits of EVs. Additionally, without a way to replace that lost tax revenue caused by the rapid transition away from gas-backed vehicles, our very infrastructure that we're trying to protect from the devastating impacts of climate change could fall into disrepair. The ultimate solution must be coupled with a serious effort to reduce the number of vehicles and miles traveled on our roads, at least on a per capita basis, through the promotion of carpooling and provision of reliable, safe, and effective alternate mode options, including transit, cycling, and other means. We have to work together to find a common sense solution that will both protect our environment while sustaining funding for transportation projects and ensuring mobility of all Nevadans for future generations. And with that, I am going to thank you and stop sharing my screen and answer questions.
Thank you so much for the presentation. And take a breath and a quick drink of water. You got through that pretty fast. I do have 4 people in line for questions, and I am going to start with Assemblyman and my Vice Chair, Watts.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Swallow, for the presentation. Appreciate it. A little bit more of a comment now. When we had a presentation on the climate strategy, your department was lifted up for its leadership in integrating greenhouse gas reductions and climate considerations into your planning and operations. So I just wanted to thank you for that and for diving into that a little bit more at the end of your presentation and noting some of the dynamics there. And I was just wondering if there's anything else you'd like to add in that particular area in terms of some of the key things that you identified that the department is going to work on with regards to climate, both for emissions reduction and adaptation to any effects that the changing climate may have on your operations?
You know, so we've identified a bunch of things. We're in the process of determining how we'll roll them out and implement them. One of the key areas that we're looking at is how can we reduce the emissions on our project. So every construction project, all the vehicles arriving to the site, the materials that are arriving to the site, how can we reduce the environmental impact of the construction of the work itself? That is a key area that we are looking at. We are looking at things we can do within our building operations, within our fleet. Because of COVID, we primarily, most of our design team has been telecommuting for the duration of COVID, and we're going to be looking at maintaining that to some extent long-term. We know that we need to get back, but to the extent that we can provide some flexibility and continue a partial telecommuting, we are going to be looking at that. I think the key thing that we all need to be thinking about, though, is as Nevadans, as the DOT, I have very little control over how we all drive as individual Nevadans and where we choose to live and work and play. And that is going to be a really hard, critical, though, conversation that we have across the state with all of our community stakeholders about how we build our communities and how we move within them.
Thank you for that. And again, thank you so much for your leadership on this area. And I hope other state agencies and departments follow your lead in incorporating some of those elements into their own plans and activities. That's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Assemblyman Watts, and I echo the sentiments of the Vice Chair. I have up next Assemblyman Ellison and then Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, this is not a question, but a statement. You know, I really want to thank you guys for what you're doing on US 93, from Wills to Jackpot. The amount of deaths on that road and no passing lanes, and you guys have done a lot to help. And I can't tell you that without it, you know, it could get worse. And you've got a great team, and I can't thank them enough. And it might take a few years to get it done, but at least, you know, how you eat an elephant one bite at a time. The same thing here. So thank you so much, and I can't thank you enough. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Assemblyman Levitt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Director Swallow, for the presentation. So there's been a lot of discussion and conversations about roadway funding, BMT, et cetera. I know you're looking to do a study, but what it looked like was that you were using data from 2018, 2019. And so my question is do you have any current data moving forward so that we can really understand the impacts of the situation as it currently exists?
Thank you for the question. We do monitor our BMT across the state annually. So we just received our 2019. It does lag by a year by the time we assemble all the information. We did just receive the 2019 data actually yesterday morning, and it was too late to incorporate that data into the presentation. That said, the study that we're going to do isn't just going to be focused on Nevada. It definitely is going to be focused on Nevada and the impacts to Nevadans, but we're going to be looking broadly to see where funding opportunities may lie and be creative about that thinking. There are a couple of states, and the SCR3 Interim Committee did look at some models that have been implemented in Utah and Washington. There's a third model that was considered from an outside agency, or from an organization, the NRDC, that was being considered. But we're going to look at all of those. We're also, and this is being presumptive that the bill comes through, we're also going to be interested in hearing what the legislators think and what our community members think of those existing models as well as potential others. I should note we're also going to be looking, as we do this, we're also going to look at the equity implications of our current gas tax model. Oftentimes when we evaluate the new, we forget to evaluate the current. And there are drawbacks to the current. So we are going to be evaluating the current model and using that evaluation in the conversation when we evaluate new models. So we will be using as current of data as is available. We are going to be surveying other states and other agencies broadly to see what the options are. We're going to do a deep dive to understand what the implications will be in terms of technology requirements, cost requirements. It is meant to be a comprehensive study to really help shape and inform both our community members as stakeholders, as well as you as legislators, so you can make those hard decisions, but having the information behind you when you make them.
Thank you for that. I just want to make sure that, we don't have any misrepresented results due to not using the most relevant data. And so it's often difficult in our jobs to make a decision that affects all of Nevada if we don't have the most relevant data in the results accordingly. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Assemblyman Levitt. And seeing that we have no more questions, I'd like to thank Director and your team for the work that you did in putting this presentation together and the work that you did during the interim with the Energy Committee, addressing a number of these issues. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Members, I know it's a long day and I apologize for that, but we have 2 more presentations, all of which are important. So we'll be joined now by members from Nevada's 2 regional transportation commissions who have a similar mandate, which is tailored to meet the needs of the different communities that they serve. From the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, we will welcome General Manager MJ Maynard, and she's joined by Angela Torres Castro, Chief Strategy, Policy, and Marketing Director. Ladies, please begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me share the screen here. Find this, share. Okay, is it good to go? Everyone can see that? Excellent. So thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Watson, committee members for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm going to provide you an overview of RTC of Southern Nevada, who we are, what we do. I'll also discuss our current funding model, and then I'll finish up with a brief description of our agency's priorities. So we are very unique. I think most of you know that we're the only agency in the US to house all of these functions under one umbrella. We are the public transit provider. We are the MPO, or Metropolitan Planning Organization. So we work closely with all of the local jurisdictions to plan and fund all of the roadways here in Southern Nevada. And then we're also the traffic manager for the entire region. So let me provide you with a little more insight on our transit system. It is RTC's responsibility to provide transportation for both our residents and our tourists. The options include, of course, our traditional fixed route service, our bus system, paratransit service. We also provide specialized services for our senior and our veteran population. The RTC currently, we operate 38 routes, servicing more than 3,000 transit stops. We're also required to provide ADA paratransit service within a 3/4 mile boundary of the fixed route service. We operate and maintain more than 800 vehicles, 800 buses. And in fiscal 20, we provided more than 65 million passenger rides on our fixed route service and 1.4 million passenger rides on our paratransit service. And as I mentioned, we do provide services to seniors and veterans. It's not mandated by law, but we know it's the right thing to do. Transportation is key to enhancing the quality of life. And many seniors and veterans, many times this is their only way to access just life's basic necessities. So in the last year alone, we provided more than 75,000 senior and veteran trips here in Southern Nevada. Sorry about that. So our transit operating revenue is primarily comprised of sales tax and passenger fares. And what's unusual in this budget slide is the inclusion of a temporary funding source. So if you look on the side, the CARES Act, that is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, that provided much needed revenue during the pandemic, and I'll get into that in the next couple of slides. We anticipate our budget projections will continue to change, and actually when compared to actuals. So, this ongoing economic pandemic has certainly impacted us. And so as we are currently working on our fiscal 22 budget, these numbers will change. So our fiscal 21 budget transit operating expenditures is primarily dedicated to contracted services. So you see on the slide, almost $198 million annually. That's the cost to provide the contracted services. Many of you know we partner with private sector contractors to provide the operations and maintenance of the system. So included in this contracted cost is the cost to operate the system, to maintain the vehicles, to maintain and clean 3,000 bus shelters, fuel, security, things like that. So prior to COVID-19, we were already facing our transit budget. We were already facing a deficit going out into the out years, and the pandemic only exacerbated that. So the orange bars represent the pre-pandemic deficit that we were facing. As you can see, it's $6 million in 20, a $20 million deficit in 21, a $14 million deficit in 22, and a $13 million deficit in 23. And we thought this is going to be tough stuff. And then the pandemic hit. And the red bars represent the effects of the pandemic. And as I mentioned, passenger fares and sales tax are the two primary sources for transit funding, and both were significantly impacted by the pandemic. And so, it increased dramatically, $30 million, it rose to the deficit in 20, a $54 million deficit now we're facing in 21, an $18 million deficit in 22, and a $25 million deficit in 23. So we had to do something. We had to look at our own internal practices. And as we were compiling our 21 budget, the team did a great job. We went back and we cut $40 million from our 21 budget that we're currently operating in right now. We eliminated and postponed capital projects. We eliminated, postponed, and in some cases cut out completely contracts. We implemented a hiring freeze. Everyone from the top down, we took a pay cut. We unfortunately had to lay off 15% of our workforce, lay off in furlough. And then we had to make a very difficult decision in October of 20 to reduce our transit service by $9 million. But thanks to our federal delegation and to the federal stimulus, really it came in the nick of time. So as I think many of you know, we received the CARES Act, and then recently a second stimulus came out. It's called the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, otherwise known as CRISA, and both funding sources will help the RTC address the budget deficit through 2025. And I'll tell you that was probably Christmas early. That was some of the best news that we could receive as a transit agency. So although the federal stimulus will help us address our deficit, as I mentioned, through 25, it's a one-time funding source, one time. So when that funding source is depleted, we're looking at significant funding deficits in the out years. As you can see here on the slide, in fiscal 26 and 27, we fall off the cliff. We're facing a $44 million deficit in both of those years. I think it's important to note, though, we're still not meeting the transportation needs of our community here in Southern Nevada. We continue to receive requests from both businesses and residents who live in areas of the valley that are either underserved or not served at all by transit, particularly in areas of the south, the southwest, West Henderson, and portions of the northwest. But we also know, and this is really, really important, we also know that many of our current transit customers, they need more frequent service. And so in order to make our transit system more equitable, right, many areas of the urban core need more service. So the orange bars that you see here on the slide represent the cost to add this much needed transit service, though it's a cost that we have not been able to include in our transit funding model. To put this in perspective, there are over 176,000 persons in the Las Vegas Valley without access to a vehicle. And many in those areas that are underserved by transit fall within or below the poverty line. And these persons do not have access to any jobs available beyond the reach of the transit system. And so as an agency, we're going to continue to look for funding wherever we can, and we'll continue to manage to our deficit. And thanks to the federal stimulus that I just mentioned, we've been able to safely maintain our transit service and keep drivers employed. And this is important to note. The specific intent of both the CARES Act and CRISA is that transit agencies are being asked to ensure that these funds are used to do just that, maintain transit service and avoid layoffs and furloughs where possible. And so today we've spent approximately $14 million to institute safety measures on behalf of our customers, the drivers, the security officers, and our staff. Those safety measures include retrofitting our driver enclosure so the driver is now fully in a closed compartment for their added safety. We've implemented a real-time passenger count so that customers that are riding transit can determine what's best for them. Is the bus too full? Maybe I'm going to wait for the next bus. Again, thinking about their health and safety. We are installing ion air filters on the vehicles for the air cleanliness inside the coaches. And then we're implementing social distancing on our vehicles by adding a bus service, additional buses, to limit the number of customers that are actually riding transit. And as I mentioned earlier, we plan to use the remaining stimulus funding to address the ongoing deficit and to continue to maintain transit service over the next few years. And so now that we've covered transit, let's talk about planning, roadway planning. So our streets and highway revenues primarily comprise of motor fuel tax and fuel revenue annexing, or FRI. So the initial FRI funding measure was made possible by Assembly Bill 413 during the 2013 legislative session. As a reminder, a portion of every gallon of gas purchased in Clark County is funding critical transportation projects, creating jobs, and really improving the economy here in Southern Nevada. This slide was a projection of our fiscal 21 budgeted streets and highways revenue. Though again, as we're currently compiling the fiscal 22 budget, we're going to adjust the fuel tax funding sources that have been impacted by the pandemic. The good news is that current trends point to actual revenues exceeding budget expectations as shown here on this slide. And the streets and highways spending on roadway projects in fiscal 21 was budgeted at $164 million. These funds are received by the RTC, but slated for spending on road work for our member jurisdictions. So certainly our roadway funding program has also been impacted by COVID-19. Pre-pandemic, these are the blue bars, we were projecting $75.9 million in motor vehicle fuel tax revenues, $118.2 million in fuel tax revenues, and you can see here there's been a revenue decrease of about $67.2 million in motor vehicle fuel tax for a loss of about close to $9 million, and we're now projecting $105.5 million in fuel tax revenue for a loss of about $12.7 million. So combined total loss right now is about $20 million, but it's, again, we're seeing trends. We're seeing more driving that's occurring. Director Swallow mentioned that in one of her slides. And so we believe as we adjust the numbers for the fiscal 22 budget, that we'll see an improvement in the decline in tax revenues. Important to note that while the pandemic has affected our infrastructure funding, there are currently more than 200 projects that are in various stages of construction and design that will not be impacted by this funding loss. And we know that construction and infrastructure projects are one of the fastest ways to support economic relief by getting work out and providing good paying jobs. And so we work in coordination with the local governments to regionally plan and fund roadway projects, while the local jurisdictions themselves, they advertise, award, and build roadway projects that are funded by the RTC. We do not design and build roadways unless specific to transit service. In working with the local governments, there's nearly $488 million in roadway projects that are currently under design or in construction, and $25.5 million in transit projects currently in design or under construction. In addition, there's almost $313 million in roadway projects that will begin construction in 2021. So we are going to continue to work closely with the local jurisdictions to expedite, fund, design, and build critically needed roadway projects throughout Southern Nevada. In addition to transit and roadways, I mentioned the RTC also oversees traffic management. Our freeway and arterial system of transportation, or our FAST division, manages the traffic network here in Southern Nevada on behalf of the state DOT and the local jurisdictions. And FAST works with the jurisdictions on traffic signals, operations, and management to include more than 4,200 intelligent transportation system, or ITS devices, and those include traffic detectors, traffic signals, and cameras. And the ITS devices allow us to monitor traffic, mitigate congestion, and maximize efficiency on the valley roadways. Additionally, there are several roadway technology projects that are underway or will be underway shortly that include special event coordination, adaptive signal control technology, active traffic management, and smart work zones. And there's some really great stuff that's coming out of this FAST division using technology, again, to really to mitigate congestion, really maximize the efficiency of all of our roadways here in Southern Nevada. And as I mentioned, I'm going to briefly provide just a brief look into our priorities as we head into this new year. As an agency, we continue to seek and apply for grant opportunities to leverage federal dollars to help transportation and highway infrastructure projects here in Southern Nevada. It was a big deal, big call to action for our grants team to really streamline the process, and they did a really good job this year. We actually applied by more than 50% grants from a year-over-year perspective, and last year, because of their efforts, we saw an additional $10 million come to the RTC based on, again, federal dollars. We're going to continue to collaborate with our agency partners, with UNLV, community stakeholders to pursue federal grants to improve mobility here in Southern Nevada, and really to ensure that we're getting our fair share of federal dollars. As part of our innovative priorities, we are seeking bill language to amend NRS 277A and 377A, and it prohibits counties of populations more than 700,000 to provide on-call or on-demand transit service, and that known as microtransit. Microtransit offers flexible routing and scheduling. I think having microtransit in our mobility toolbox would allow us to enhance the customer experience and potentially provide service efficiencies. This bill will allow for potential pilots in areas that either don't have transit service right now or areas that may need a different type of transit service. We socialized this bill with the Southern Nevada Forum. Many of you know that already. The bill will be presented to both the Assembly and Senate Growth and Infrastructure Committees, so look for that. In addition to microtransit, we're working on other technology-based transit services. We formed partnerships with Uber and Transit to allow riders to seamlessly buy their transit passes on their platforms rather than having to download another app. And in 2020, nearly 15,000 transit passes were sold through those partnerships. We also partnered with Lyft to provide cost-efficient mobility solutions through our paratransit ride-on-demand program and a workforce mobility program that enables employers to support first-mile, last-mile solutions for their employees. And to date, those efforts, those programs have saved the RTC over $2 million. And so anytime that we can look to technology or another innovative way of looking at how we do business and we save money, we have a chance to take those savings and apply that to our local market in support of our local residents. And then finally, we know that sustainability and addressing climate change is a big deal. It's a federal and state priority. Nationally and in Nevada, the transportation sector is now the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. Though important to note, the single occupant vehicle is the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in this sector. We began transitioning our fleet from diesel to compressed natural gas back in 2007. And to date, our inventory of almost over 800 buses, we're at about 90% of compressed natural gas. We are in the process of going out for an RFP. We're going to be introducing renewable natural gas into our pipeline in a partnership with Southwest Gas. And then we received a $3.8 million grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation to deploy 2 hydrogen fuel cell buses and install the necessary hydrogen fueling infrastructure. We really look forward to continuing to evolve our fleet, again, from diesel to CNG to potentially electric. It's anticipated that the hydrogen fuel cell electric buses will hit our roadways in 2022. And then we've also started the development of a sustainability plan for our own organization. Staff, we've conducted research on peer agency sustainability plans to identify approaches, reporting protocols, and performance metrics. So the idea is this plan will help our organization define and advance sustainability through action items and baseline performance indicators. And that is my presentation. I'd be more than happy to present or be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Let's see.
Thank you so much for educating the committee on the agency's role within the transportation landscape of Southern Nevada. And I know that we do have a few questions for you. We're going to start out with Assemblyman Levitt, and he'll be followed by Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Great.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Ms. Maynard, for the presentation. Disclosure, up until about a month and a couple weeks ago, Ms. Maynard was my boss. So I wanted to make sure that my question was not seen as bias in that realm. But one thing this is from a constituent point of view, with all the construction that's going on the roadways, both current and planned, especially projects that are on maybe the arterial streets or on the freeways. How are you communicating with the public as far as roadway projects that may be impacting them?
MJ Maynard, for the record, thank you for that question. And by the way, it was great to be Assemblyman Levitt's boss. So we certainly are using back in 2012 we started something called the Orange Cone, Seeing the Orange Cone, partnered with Waze so that drivers that were using that application would be alerted to conjunction zones, including where a lane's closed by orange cones. That is still happening today. We have a website that points to all the areas that are currently under construction. And then we just, our board just approved, actually this month we'll be approving a contract with the company that we've been in pilot form, smart work zones, where by way of thousands of dashboard cameras and artificial intelligence, and we now have a way to go to look in real time by way of this mobile application or website, and you can actually see where the construction zones are happening. And that's important to note because when a project is awarded and the general contractor then contracts with the barricade company, they have to follow a permitting standard by various jurisdictions. And if they're not, so for example, maybe they're only supposed to close a lane from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. The jurisdictions now have a chance to go in and take a look at if in fact that is happening. What's noteworthy is that the pilot was just occurring in the city of Las Vegas. Once our board approves from a pilot to a program, this technology will be available valley-wide for your constituents as well, so we love it.
Thank you, Ms. Maynard. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the question. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair Monroe Moreno, and it is wonderful to see you, Ms. Maynard. She is actually still my boss. I'm on leave. So one of the things that I am concerned about and would like you to give a little bit more background on is this micro transit technology piece. Could you please speak to us about how where you are in this process as far as the study or implementation of it, so we can get a better idea?
Thank you so much for the question, Assembly Summers Armstrong, MJ Mayor for the record. And again, I feel pretty fortunate that I get a chance to work with people like Assemblyman Levitt and Assembly Summers. They're certainly experts in this field. So it's a great question. Microtransit, as many of you may not be aware that we actually had a microtransit pilot in the Strip area, Las Vegas Strip and downtown area about a year and a half ago. And we found that to be just a great location, just the density of customers. And actually, we discontinued the pilot at the 6-month period because we found out through the NTA that we really couldn't operate the microtransit system. The trends for that study proved that they were on the right track. But I think you may be referring to, and I think it's a very valid point. I think microtransit, is it just, are you taking resources and extending it to areas where does it make sense? Is it, what kind of first mile, last mile connection? I think right now the RTC was awarded a federal grant called the HOPE grant. And it's important to note this is a study. It's a study to look at areas of the Las Vegas Valley that are, for example, food deserts, and are people having a tough time connecting from a food desert to where they work, live, and play. And I will tell you though that it is just a study. It's not providing capital funds for microtransit, because the research from that study may show that in those areas where there are food deserts and folks have a tough time connecting to those services, there's already quite a bit of transit there. And maybe that's not the right solution. So I think at this point, we're open to looking at microtransit in areas where is it a first mile, last mile connection to a transit center? Is it connecting transit to areas where, think of an after school program where we're some kind of shuttle. I think that there's a lot of possibilities that microtransit will work, but I want the community to be assured that equity is going to be at the root of all we do. And we're going to ensure that whatever microtransit pilot we are allowed to look at, everything that we do in transit is going to start with the equity question. Does it make sense? Is it equitable? And I think that's really going to drive us to do the right thing as it relates to having a microtransit pilot. And I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Ms. Maynard. Chair Monroe Marino, may I have a follow-up question, please?
Of course.
Thank you. One of the things that I heard from Ms. Swallow in her presentation was the increase in drive miles that we still see every time there's a development. We're seeing increases in rider-driven miles. What is the RTC's plan or process for trying to get people? I mean, it's tough with COVID, but if we're thinking post-COVID behavior about increasing ride sharing, maybe using vans or other things to cut down on vehicle miles driven for a couple of reasons. One, of course, to get people off the roads and to reduce carbon monoxide. And I'm just concerned that we might be missing some opportunities. And I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Again, great question. Thank you for the question, MJ Mayor, for the record. Well, I agree with you. First and foremost, the way to reduce vehicle miles traveled is to have another option for those folks that are driving their car. And that means that your transit system has to be able to compete in some way with that single occupant vehicle trip. Unfortunately, we receive 0.3% of public support, if you will, for transit here in Southern Nevada. We run very lean. It's a very skinny model compared to our peers in the rest of the United States. And so we do look for opportunities to think innovatively, to think creatively. I will tell you that from fiscal 12 through fiscal 19, we added 29% more service hours into our service. But we didn't do that by sprawling the system because there was such a need for more frequency in the urban core. For the folks that rely on transit, they are the ones that should have the least harm. And so whether it's looking at a partnership with Lyft to provide service that will save the agency money. And when we save the agency money, we can use that funding again for areas that of our valley that, again, for folks that have no other option to move about the community except for transit. But I think at some point, public transit is part of the sustainability solution, and ensuring that public transit is such that people want to ride it. It's frequent. It takes them where they need to go. That's where we need to get to, and I think we have to ensure that we remain relevant, and we're always following what the consumer demand is. You know, we do interviews. We have free Wi-Fi on our buses, and we ask them questions every other month. Just how are we doing, and are you taking transit to work? I think whatever decision we decide to do in public transit, the first thing we need to do is get with our community and find out what they need, and find out and we, you know, so we've done that with the onboard process. We understand what the long-term future mobility looks like, but whatever we do, whether it's implementing smaller buses, entering a microtransit pilot, partnering with another technology company, we're always going to ask the customer first and foremost, what do you need and how do you need it and what can we do for you? And I think that's, again, going to drive a lot of our decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have one last question, and that will be from Assemblywoman Peters.
Oh, I feel like I have to get up out of my chair to to have this question. Thank you, Chair. So my question is regarding the data related to showing people where construction activity exists in the Bay in the area, and in the Bay Area, it just shows up on Google. And I don't know if that's a contract service that they have with Google, or if Google is just so integrated within the Bay Area that they just have enough people around they know. But I'm curious if you guys have looked into that as well. It's just so universal to use Google Maps. And then the other question I had related to data, if you don't mind, is I know when I use Lyft in Las Vegas, I often do the ride sharing option, which means we have more than one trip in the same vehicle. And I'm wondering if they have data that they could share with you that would show you where hotspots are for where people are asking for that service already in the valley.
Great questions. Thank you for them. MJ Mayer for the record. So I'll have to check. I don't know off the top of my head if to have Google place your construction zones on their platform, if that is something that is just part of what they do, if there's a cost of that. What you're describing is exactly what we have with our friendship with Waze. And we know we have a lot of usage, but I think to your point, a lot of folks with their Apple phone, the Google Maps is right there, and they do defer to Google Maps. So I will get back to you on that particular question. As far as data from the TNCs, so we receive no data from the RTCs except for for example, the workforce mobility pilot that we have. We know how many folks took a trip from our last bus stop to the front door of their place of employment. They don't share a lot of data. The data that they do share, I think, goes to the NTA. And so we don't. I really can't answer the question because that's not a piece of information that we have access to.
That's really good to know, because you did say that you have contracting with them to provide ride sharing service, right? So it's an interesting piece. I wonder if we could kind of fill that gap in and see if they would share some of that data. And then with regard to the additional piece, getting back to us on Google, would you just share that with staff to make sure we all have access to that? Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters, for those questions. And I'd like to thank our presenters for the overview. And that we have no more questions in queue. So thank you so much for the information today, and enjoy the rest of your day. So that brings us to the last but not least. We have a presentation for overview of the Regional Transportation Commission from Northern Nevada. And we'll have presenting today the Executive Director, Bill Thomas, from Washoe County. If you are in the room, the floor is yours, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me get this.
And thank you for your patience with us. I appreciate that.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Bill Thomas, and I'm Executive Director of the RTC of Washoe. Along with me today are Legislative Representative Michael Hillerby, Deputy Director Amy Cummings, and Director of Public Transportation Mark Maloney. We're very appreciative of and thankful for this opportunity, and particularly at the end of the day, your patience and attention is much appreciated. This afternoon, I'd like to familiarize the committee with our organization, demonstrate how we hope to be a significant supporter of the legislator's effort to address critical infrastructure needs, actions to address climate change, and strategies to ensure we have a balanced transportation system to benefit our citizens and the state of Nevada. Our organization has been in existence for about 56 years, and I can proudly say we're an organization that models regional cooperation in solving community problems. We have 5 local officials that provide our oversight and policy direction, and Director Swallow is a ex officio member. So much like RTC Southern Nevada, we provide MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization services, public transportation, and engineering and construction. As Director Maynard pointed out, that we actually are unique nationally. There aren't very many organizations that have all 3 of these functions, so it gives us an opportunity to create a unity of purpose and assure maximum response in our coordinated response to transportation issues. We all know that the transportation sector of our economy is a significant contributor to greenhouse gases. And as we move to develop strategies and actions to address climate change, I would offer that RTC Washoe has been and will continue to be a significant player in the effort to reduce the impact of automobiles on our environment, and we are well suited to assist in addressing climate change. The most impactful resource we have is our fixed route transit system. As you can see, the majority of our trips are currently for essential purposes. We supply transportation to those who are challenged by our transportation system to address their needs for work trips, doctor's appointments, and trips to grocery stores, drugstores, etc. While these types of trips will continue to be the mainstay of our system, if we want to make an impact on transit, we need to find ways to get more people on the bus. The most productive part of our system is what we call our BRT, or Bus Rapid Transit. As you can see, about a quarter of our trips occur on these 2 corridors. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the BRT term, think of it as a train system with rubber tires. It's fixed in the sense of capital required to construct is significant and not easily replicated. This route, in combination with the 4th and Prater, represents an investment both federally and locally of about $150 million. So as I just said, this is very difficult to replicate this in our community and other locations. We do have plans to extend the system to the west on 4th Street and further along South Virginia Street. What is needed is to effectively address climate change and optimize significant public investment in our BRT system is to find ways to bring people to the system. In other words, as I pointed out, we have a very large investment and we need to find ways to bring people to it. It's very difficult to move fixed route to people. We need to figure out strategies as we deal with our affordable housing crisis to bring people closer in to ride our transit. To make this happen, we're going to have to be creative as government as we work with private sector to deliver more dense housing to these specific areas if we want to succeed at this, to make sure everybody wins. The urban patterns in our state are primarily suburban in nature. Sorry, got a hoarse throat today. That means that bringing traditional fixed route to people is cost prohibitive. in the long term, and it's also highly non-productive. The method of public transit has the most potential to connect people in need in our communities by using microtransit. We've implemented what we call our Flex Ride service, which marries mass transit site of public transit with the demand-based desires of the public to provide a more scalable response. The new method has shown success in several sub-areas, and our community has learned how we can integrate this into our fixed route system to meet people's demands. I would point out that not every place is successful at microtransit is what we're finding, but it gives us a tool to really test our community. Talking further about climate change, we started adding electric buses in 2014 to reduce our environmental impact on the community. I'm proud to say we just recently added 2 more EV buses to our fleet to bring our percentage to about 33%. We've also been incrementally adding necessary charging facilities in our network to support this change in fuel source. This graphic demonstrates the quantitative benefits of our efforts. As you can see, our transit system over the past 3 quarters has ranged from 5 to 7 million pounds of CO2 emitted that's been reduced by our transit system. So quite impactful in terms of the climate change impacts. In addition to answering the climate change challenge, we also are actively pursuing actions to address equity and environmental justice. We're doing this by actively targeting some of our established neighborhoods where we work on improvements to benefit safety, particularly for residents by adding sidewalks, crosswalks, and other pedestrian enhancements. All the benefits I've just reviewed are primarily funded by 2 revenue sources. Fuel tax, which makes up close to 50% of our revenue, is the source for all roadway and safety improvements. Sales tax is the funding source for our transit system. This past year, federal support has increased significantly, particularly in the area of funding operations for transit. Prior to the pandemic, the federal government did not fund operations and solely kept their contributions to capital and bus maintenance. So this particular change in funding is critical to us, and what the future holds will be telling on our ability to meet the transit needs of our community. As far as how we spend our resources, you can see from this graphic that most is spent on transit and roadway preservation and mobility, with a smaller portion to roadway projects. In looking at our major funding source, fuel tax, it is important to acknowledge the foresight of the legislature starting in 2003 and the desire of the voters to approve an indexing of our fuel tax. This indexing has allowed us to maintain our ability to fund our system in response to ever increasing prices. I might point out, however, that the pandemic has exposed, much like you heard from Director Swallow, the risk of this funding source. For the first time since the indexing was implemented, fuel tax has gone down year over year in absolute terms. And in fact, this past year, we were $6 million under budget from what we had projected based on PAC's revenues that we had received, which results in reducing, of course, our ability to respond to our community needs. As far as impact on local and state economy, I prepared this slide to show in the 4th quarter of 2020 that we directly resulted in our expenditures directly resulted in about 1,700 jobs in our community. The last point I wanted to mention is the important work of SCR3 subcommittee, and I want to thank the chair for allowing us to participate in that effort. And we are looking very much forward to working with the committee to see how we can address what is a pending and critical need to talk about how we replace fuel tax. So with that, I will conclude and we will be available for any questions you might have. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for your work in the interim with these conversations. That's We tried to get through that in the interim on the Energy Committee. I know that there's a few people that have a question. I'm not sure if Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong wants to go first or Assemblywoman Peters, but either one of you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chandra Summers Armstrong, Assembly District 6. Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your presentation. And I just sort of cued in on something that you said, which was that you had received federal funding and you were able to use it for operations. Did I hear that properly?
Yes, you did. That's correct.
Okay, if I might follow up with that, I'd like to know, do you believe that this is a trend that will continue, or is this just during this pandemic?
Well, it started as the pandemic. It looks like the most recent conversations at the federal level, they're going to continue to provide money for operations. So we have our fingers crossed, but you know, it's a question I can't really answer very well, Assemblywoman, because you know, it really is depending on the federal budget and what they do in DC. But certainly we're lobbying to keep that money available for operations.
So if I just might follow up, one more question. How would that change the landscape for your transit operations if you were able to depend, say, for the next 3 to 5 years on supplements from the federal government for operation? Thank you.
So I think Assemblywoman Summer Armstrong, the biggest benefit is going to be that it'll keep us from having to reduce service and actually help us get people on the bus, because you know, we all know that it's a very demand-oriented customer that we have right now. And the challenge with transit is we have to get people to change their behaviors and patterns to use what is a fixed system. And so to the extent we can get this kind of money, it allows us to run our buses more frequently, which means we get more people to ride the bus. So I would say that's probably the biggest benefit. It'll allow us to run, for example, 10-minute routes, which will increase people riding the bus. And if we lose that money, then our answer is to cut back, much like what had to happen in RTC Southern Nevada, where the service is reduced, which then results in less people being able to make those critical trips, as well as the productivity of those routes go down significantly.
That answer your question? Okay. Assemblywoman Peters, did you have a question?
Yes, please. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, because I feel like maybe I missed it. Did you say that those federal dollars were related to COVID funds, or were those separate from the COVID dollars that came into the state?
So we got a direct allocation that was tied to the pandemic, but it wasn't I think what most people think of as CARES COVID money. It was specific money that went to FTA, which could be then allocated to, based on a formula that was predetermined, to the local transit agencies of a certain size. So it was CARES money, but it's not the CARES money that went to the state or local government.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. And then my other question is more of a follow-up question, if you don't mind following up with staff on this slide that shows your greenhouse gas emission reductions. It's only for 2020, and I'm just curious what that looks like compared to maybe 2019 if you were collecting that data. So if you have that, would you mind compiling it and sending it to staff to distribute, please?
Be glad to do that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I am not seeing any other questions. Director Thomas, thank you so much for your patience, and it took a while to get to you, but it was a great presentation and we truly appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, members, that brings us to our last item on our agenda, and that will be public comment. So at this time, I'll give our BPS staff an opportunity to see if we have anyone waiting for public comment. As a reminder, you can register online to either speak to the committee by phone. On the webpage for today's meeting on Nellis, located on the legislative website, you will see buttons allowing you to submit your online opinions or participate in writing or by phone. If you're calling in, please remember to clearly and slowly state and spell your name for the record after you unmute your phone. We ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes or less to accommodate comments from others. May we have our first caller, if there's any callers on the waiting line.
Chair, we currently have one caller in the queue. I am admitting them now.
Thank you.
Will the caller with the last 3 digits 580, please press *6 to unmute, slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, I'm Paul Enos. I'm CEO of the Nevada Trucking Association. I would just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to our 2 state agencies that presented today, NDOT and the Department of Motor Vehicles. They have been absolutely phenomenal in working with my folks through the pandemic. In Nevada, 92% of all our freight is delivered by truck. And while everything was closed, while we had rest stops closing around the country, NDOT kept them open. DMV still had their operations available for our people to be able to get their permits, to be able to get their folks in, to get driver's licenses, and to be able to continue truck driving schools operating. We were a state that really did a great job considering everything that we were dealt with. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank both the folks at DMV and NDOT for their leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Enos. I kind of miss seeing you in the hallways. I never thought I'd say that, but we will see you soon on the presentation. And I know the agencies truly appreciate your comments today.
Chair, we have no more callers in the queue this time.
Awesome. Well, that concludes this meeting for today. I'd like to thank our presenters, the committee, our broadcast staff, and the members of the public who have joined us virtually here today. Our next meeting of the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure will be Thursday, February 11th at 1:30. We will have several presentations from agencies involved in Nevada's transportation and energy sectors. And with that, this meeting is adjourned, and I wish you all a wonderful day.